All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Welcome back to the show, everyone. Well, I'm very excited to be joined by Joanna Groarke, who is the Vice President of Exhibits and Programming at the New York Botanical Garden. She's going to give us some insider insight about their current Alice-themed exhibit titled Wonderland, Curious Nature. You should just check out the website because some of the images, especially the rabbit, are fantastic. Anyway, it runs May 18th through October 27th, 2024. So everybody who can get to the Bronx should do their best to check it out. So we're going to be talking about flowers, we're going to be talking a lot about mushrooms, and so much more. Joanna, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
We are very excited given your exhibit has so many aspects of Alice in Wonderland. Not just what you would think on the surface would be gardening and the beauty of the place, but there's every medium imaginable practically. You're the vice president for exhibitions and programming, and apparently there was quite a search to find you based on the bio. How did you come to work for this organization?
I have actually been at the garden for just about 13 years.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I've been in my current role for about 2+ years, but I've worked in exhibitions and interpretation, which is the development of all of the educational media that you see when you visit. So that's signage and audio tours and video guides and mobile apps. I've been doing that since I started here 13 years
It
ago.
seems like such a dynamic kind of job because of the diversity of tasks you have, and then all the different people you get to interface with, and especially with this exhibit because you have a lot of cosplay and musicians, and there's the culinary aspects of it, there's the artwork, there's the books and the library aspect of it. Can you give us how this was conceived and where do you start when you're putting together something that's this massive? I mean, it's a real undertaking.
It is a real undertaking, and it's really it's always a labor of love every time we create an exhibition. In particular, our summer exhibitions, which Wonderland Curious Nature is a summer exhibition. These are you often original shows that we're creating in-house with the help of many, many people, both in the garden and outside of the garden. And we always say that good ideas come from everywhere. So sometimes it's a concept that is very closely related to something that's happening in science or in horticulture here at the garden. Sometimes it's something that one of us reads late at night when we go down the rabbit hole on some topic online, and it sparks an idea that we then start to discuss together. In the case of Wonderland, I think that for most of the time that I have been at the garden, Wonderland has come up periodically as just a topic that's really ripe for exploration through the medium of horticulture, because of the connections to science and botany and what was happening in the world scientifically at the time that the book was written, as well as because the narrative of the story, so much of it is animated by the setting of gardens and nature and the drive. Very early in the story, Alice looks through a keyhole and sees what she calls the most beautiful garden she's ever seen. And so one of the things that she's trying to do throughout the story is to get into that garden, to find that garden and explore
Right.
it. Um, so that speaks to our hearts also, as yes, our exhibitions are very multifaceted, as you mentioned, but at our core, we're all plant people here. And so we're driven by that interest and wonder and excitement about plants. And so that's always been kind of a touchstone for us.
So, what were some of the plants or flowers that were in the book that because you mentioned that you saw it online, you mentioned the exploration of Victorian gardens and some of the vegetation that was in his novel Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Was that the sort of starting point, or was it what where did that start?
Definitely the plants and the garden settings that are described in the book are part of what first drew us in. One of the things we do with any exhibition like this is very early on, we develop a plant list. So, of course, we're developing a checklist of objects and historical objects. If we're using the collections of our library, we have the Lou Esther T. Mertz Library here at the garden, which is the world's richest resource on all things horticultural and plant science. So we draw upon those collections quite a bit for our exhibitions. We also have the William and Linda Sear Herbarium, where we have
Hmm.
8 million dried plant specimens that have been collected
Wow.
over hundreds of years by scientists. And we have many examples of those herbarium specimens on display for this show. And then, yes, the horticulture. The garden was founded as a seat of scientific inquiry into the world of plants. And so those two resources that I just mentioned are incredibly vital to the work we do to showcase that research. We were also founded to be a place where beautiful horticulture was celebrated. So my team in exhibitions and programming works closely with horticulture to develop these voluminous plant lists.
Hmm.
So one of the things we do is mine the text of the book and the images that have been created, both to illustrate the book and then, of course, in all of the many film adaptations to see what we can see. So we're noticing which flowers are talking to Alice in the Garden of Live Flowers. We're noticing what plants are mentioned on, I think, page 1 or page 2. She's making a daisy chain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're making notes all along as we read because that is a great resource for us to know what plants were grown at that time and would have been easily referenced by the author, and then also to start to build what the world of Wonderland, which is what we're trying to do through horticulture.
What's great is the Alice is so deeply seated in culture, and you're not just using Lewis Carroll's version, you're using all these various versions because you mentioned the looking through the keyhole, and that obviously is from the Disney movie and is not in the original text. So I love that you're pulling all of pop culture into this exhibit. I'm curious about when you enter the exhibit, you are met by a oversized white rabbit.
Mhm.
So I was wondering what flowers those were because it's such a stunning first image to enter the Wonderland. So can you tell us some of the flowers that you use, and how do you keep those flowers alive and from wilting and from season to season? What's that like?
Sure. Well, the first rule is that I'm not allowed to touch the flowers. I am not myself a talented plant person in when it comes to caring for plants. Um, but I love them very dearly, obviously. And so I work again with my colleagues in horticulture. In the
Yes.
case of you're referring to our white rabbit, our giant white rabbit, he's about 10 feet tall and he is situated in our visitor center. So he is really like in the story, the first sign of Wonderland
Hmm.
is when Alice sees the white rabbit in his little waistcoat. So we wanted to capture that moment where you are arriving and you realize almost immediately that you're about to have a sort of magical, whimsical experience at the garden. We worked with our friends at Mosaic Culture, which is a company based in Montreal, and they produce these beautiful living sculptures, essentially, that are based in an ancient art of Mosaic culture, which involved creating and still does involve creating these beautiful wire armatures that then plants are plugged into.
Okay.
Um, And the plants that are most prominently featured on the White Rabbit are a special variety of sedum that has a little bit of a white tinge to the foliage, and that's what makes him have his white fur. And then Alternathera, which is used to create that waistcoat. And then it has a whole very sophisticated irrigation system and all of that so that we can make sure that he's looking at his best every day when you arrive.
The irrigation system must be a work of art in itself because I'm similar to you. I just know that I'm supposed to water my plants every couple of days. That's the extent of my garden. What about in the library? You have the books displayed, and the emphasis in the library is on the enduring popularity of Alice in Wonderland. What what conclusion have you come to why Alice has lasted for 150 plus years, in your estimation?
Well, I think that a lot of people have expressed different opinions about what it is, but I think um, that certainly what speaks to me and what spoke to us as we were organizing the exhibition was is the way in which Alice feels like this universal heroine. She is a stand-in for the reader, which is not unusual, but was unusual at the time, in particular for children, to see in literature a heroine who was um, actively exploring the world around her. And yes, she was subject to the whims and events that adults, sometimes human adults and sometimes animal adults, sort of put into motion, but she also has impact on the course of the narrative. And that's not very common in children's literature at the time. So to us, that sort of sense of empowerment and exploration of the world around you is one that really speaks to us and we thought would speak to our visitors and really deeply connects to the way that we hope visitors of all ages will experience the garden. We have a lot of programming for kids in our children's garden and in our Edible Academy that is all about encouraging kids to explore nature
Wait, did
and
you
try
say
things.
Edible Academy? What'd you say?
Yes, the Edible Academy. Yes, the Edible
Where do I
Academy
sign
is
up?
it's pretty great. It's actually one of my favorite spots at the garden.
What is
The Edible
it?
Academy is we have two gardens that are really for children. Although of course children explore the entirety of our 250 acres here in the Bronx. But the Edible Academy is on the site of what has been our family garden for generations. Uh, and in 2018, we reopened it as the Edible Academy. We have classrooms, a greenhouse, and uh, vegetable gardens throughout this space. And thousands of school kids come every year and they plant the seeds and tend to them and weed the beds, and then they learn how to cook with the produce that they produce. So
Wow.
we have schools that come repeatedly and they sort of see the beds through all of the full growing season and then get to cook with the produce and bring produce home and recipes. We have kids who come in every week for drop-in programming with their grown-ups, and they get to have a similar experience over the course of the season. And then we do one-off visits where you get to wherever in their phase of growth and tending and harvest, the kids get to participate. And it's really fun. My own daughter has participated in the programs and the camps that we hold there in the summertime, and it's a pretty special place. So yeah, we
That's,
encourage that kind of literally digging in, getting your hands dirty. And
yeah.
so someone like Alice feels like um, she really resonates as a protagonist who is herself getting involved right away in the events of Wonderland.
Let me there's a lot of interpretations of Alice, whether you have taken obviously the family friendly and the whimsical aspect. For other people, when they read it, it's more nightmarish and it's a little bit scary, especially when it comes to, growing really tall and shrinking really small. And when you first read the book, well, let me ask you a first question. When were you introduced, and in what medium were you introduced? And then what was your reaction to the first introduction of Alice?
Sure. I was a very bookish child, but interestingly, like so bookish that when people my age reference things on television and things like that, I don't always understand the reference. But interestingly, for Wonderland, I was first introduced to it through the Disney film. So that was my first introduction. Um, but I would have pretty quickly then picked up the book after seeing the film. And um, and I think even in the Disney film, I was struck by the fact that it is a little scary. You know, these giant flowers are being mean to her, and the queen, the Red Queen, obviously is pretty scary. Um, and I think that that is sort of inescapable. And I think something that kids, and yes, our show is definitely uh, meant to be enjoyed by visitors of all ages. Um, but I think that kids are drawn to a little bit of frightening. They're drawn a little bit to sort of frightening stories or uh, a little bit of the darker side of stories. Um, and I definitely, as a kid, remember feeling that that was part of the story and feeling ambivalent about it. But I think that um, in particular, one of the things that I've found really resonant as I think about the book and the films as we've been working on this show for the last few years was how Alice as a kid quite overtly in a lot of ways expresses her frustration with the world of adults and the world of rules that's around her,
Which is very
which
relatable.
it's very relatable. And also, I think it's something that was pretty revolutionary um, because she also is very clearly well schooled in etiquette and how to behave and what is polite and what is not polite. And that idea that kids both chafe against rules, but also are aware of them and understand that the structure exists and is they sometimes rely on it, I think is actually in a lot of ways at the heart of what um, I, as a kid, and probably a lot of kids find both exciting and a little scary about the story.
Yeah, and also how illogical adults can be at times with their
Right.
rules, and they're putting you in this box. I found that to be also very relatable. I'm wondering, when I started working on my Alice projects, I started noticing, like when you buy a new car and you buy a new Audi, and then suddenly you see all the Audis out there. It's like everybody has an Audi,
Right.
or whatever it is. Well, same with Alice. Suddenly, down the rabbit hole was used in politics and music. I mean, every single day I was reading somebody saying down the rabbit hole. So 2 years ago, when everybody on your team started this, did the Alice references and how deeply seated in pop culture start to bubble up with ideas where you could put these things, like, for instance, cosplay? I didn't realize how many people were doing cosplay, and whether it was the traditional Mad Hatter or certainly Johnny Depp's Mad Hatter. And then, it's everywhere. And did you guys have a kind of similar, insight when you were starting to build this out?
We did. I think, in organizing exhibitions like this, we're thinking about all the ways in which our visitors find meaning around the topic. And we talk a lot as a team in exhibitions and then as a broader team here at the garden that is responsible for all of the sort of visitor experience. We talk about making sure that there are points of entry that allow everyone to have the experience that they want to have because um, that will make what they are seeing more resonant. It'll make them more excited about the plants that they see if they remember if they associate it with this experience that they were hoping to have, that they were expecting to have. The cultural expectations and the cultural sort of imagination that exists around Alice is something that we definitely talked about and have continued to talk about throughout the run of the show. We had a feeling that we would have a lot of people coming dressed as Alice and other characters. And that was in part because we had seen that with other shows where you might not expect it. You know, nearly 10 years ago now, we had a show that was focused on the Mexican artist Frida Kahlo
Hmm.
and her garden in Mexico City and how the plants that she grew there were impactful in her larger artistic practice. And we had a lot of Frida lookalikes coming to the show, people who would dress up like Frida and her husband Diego Rivera and would come to see the show. We ended up organizing Frida lookalike contests as a night activity for some of our Frida alfresco nights for that show. When we had our Kusama, Yayoi Kusama, the contemporary artist, when we had an exhibition of her work in 2021, we had lots of people dressed up as Kusama. We had a lot of baby Kusamas in particular, actually. So we knew that this was something that folks liked to do when there was a show that really appealed to them. So we had a feeling that that would happen. We have some opportunities for people to come and dress up when people buy a family package ticket to the exhibition at the garden. They can actually buy headpieces so that each member of their party can dress as Alice or the Queen or the White Rabbit. And we found that those were snapped up really fast.
Wow.
We had never done anything like that before,
Wow.
so we weren't entirely sure how it would do, but it was something that was really popular. And so then that has led us to every time you work on an exhibition for years and years, you go in with a plan of what the show will be. And then as you start to have visitors, you make little tweaks and adjustments and changes. So we knew that we wanted to have opportunities for all of our visitors to meet some of the characters. And so my team organized so that each month we have a different character or characters that are on site on the weekends that visitors can take photos with and they can see them and they can talk to them. Right now, we're in the midst of our Mad Hatter month.
Hmm.
So we have the Mad Hatter here every weekend. And we found that visitors really wanted a photo op as part of that. So we had to think a little bit about how we tweaked that experience. And then as we were approaching the end of the school year here in New York City, we actually organized a Mad for Summer weekend where we encouraged families to come and sort of celebrate the start of summer here at the garden. And we had never done this before, but it was so much fun. We said, if you are anybody who shows up with their kids, if they're wearing a costume or any kind of Alice inspired garb, kids get in for free if they're dressed up.
Oh.
And we had this weekend of so many fun activities and lots of photo ops and lots of sort of interactive moments with the characters. And
What
it
a
was a
smart
blast.
idea. I mean, obviously Disney has done that very successfully. So, to have characters for the photo ops is great. Hey, why don't you give us a little rundown of those entry points? Because you have things for kids, but you also have, cocktail hour for adults, which is 21 and over. There's also food. I've read about a lot of different music. Didn't you have a Pride month or day where you had a specific DJ there? So to your point, there is a lot of entry points. And for our listeners, maybe you can talk about the diversity of the show and some of those entry points that you keyed in on early.
Absolutely. When you hear about an exhibition focused on Alice in Wonderland, people will automatically ask about what there is for kids and family. But we knew that Wonderland, I mean, it has persisted for 150 plus years. It's never been out of print. It's been published in 80 some languages at this point. Um, so we knew that it was an enduring story for a reason, and that if a story endures like that, it's not only being consumed by kids. Um, so it was important to us to make sure that we had a lot of different ways for people to experience. So yes, we have an exhibition in the library where you can see some of the original publications. You can also learn about what was happening in terms of science and botany in the 19th century in Britain and around the world. It's important, remember, Wonderland was published just a few years after Darwin published On the Origin of Species.
Hmm.
So, which was something that completely transformed not only science, but in a lot of ways, modern society with the ideas that it was putting forth. And so, in that environment, a book like Wonderland comes out, and it's also coming out in an environment where increasingly there's an acknowledgement of childhood as a different stage of development. Children are not just like miniature adults, but are
Right.
considered to have a different way of learning and a different way of seeing the world. And that was something that we were really interested in because kids know that they're not adults, obviously, and adults know that kids are not adults. But we knew that adults in particular would find that story interesting. And the idea that Wonderland is shaped by a lot more than just the desire to create something that entertains children, which is
Right.
true of a lot of um, what kids consume even today. Every show that your kid watches has like little Easter eggs for adults, little jokes that the kids don't get that are really for the adults who are watching the show, or same is true when you're reading stories with your kids. So that was something that we wanted to make sure we did. But also, we wanted to speak to the long-term cultural resonance of the story and the ways in which it's been interpreted through the lens of pop culture, as we talked about, through the lens of psychedelics, through the lens of different artists. So one of the things that we have that's part of our show is a display of different herbarium specimens of different uh, psychoactive plants
Mm, okay.
and information about how studies of the mind and cognition and psychology were really pre becoming more and more prevalent during the Victorian era in all over the world. And so the documentation of everything from coffee to cannabis to opium was not just in the scientific realm, but also in the way that different writers and doctors and psychiatrists were starting to write about the effects of different substances on the mind was something that was really interesting to us because that while that's a modern day association
Hmm.
with the Wonderland stories, and there's no actual evidence that the author himself was partaking in any of these substances. In fact, most
Right.
likely was not. That association is one that is really interesting and fruitful and has led to a lot of different cultural expressions from music to the way some of the films and other adaptations that we see today have entered the world. So that was something that we wanted to make sure we talked about, especially because most of those substances come from plants and fungi. So, and that's where we have something to add to the conversation because we have the expertise here at the garden in our scientists and in our collections to really kind of weave that tale in a little bit more detail. And then because we've spent so much time thinking about this show and thinking about the stories, we also wanted to invite contemporary artists whose work either quite overtly engages with Wonderland. We have photographs by Abelardo Morel, where he created these incredible dioramas using illustrations from different editions of the story and then photographed them. So we have his photographs on display. We have work by um, Patrick Jacobs, who's an artist based here in New York, who creates these beautiful miniature worlds that you peer into. And it's like peeking into the rabbit hole. And the three that he made for our exhibition are called Portals for Alice.
Oh, cool. Cool.
And he was quite overtly inspired by the story. And then we have, of course, our White Rabbit and other works. But then as we were looking at sort of the world around us in the contemporary art world, and we worked closely with our guest curator, Jennifer Gross, to develop our list of artworks that we have on view, we became really interested in the work of this group called the Fold House Collective. And they are based internationally and here in the US. They've done a number of installations at Burning Man, and they created this
Okay.
work called Shroom and Lumen, which is two 15-foot tall mushroom sculptures that are kinetic. So while you're standing outside of our conservatory looking at them, you'll notice that one of them moves.
Oh,
and they
that's
actually sort of appear to be breathing.
oh,
They inflate and deflate, and at night they light up.
wow.
And all of these different strobing LEDs
Wow.
are lighting them up in all different colors.
Mushrooms are very popular in culture right now, and
Exactly.
there was an amazing article in National Geographic about all of the varieties of mushrooms, and I found it so interesting. I had no idea. Do you guys explore, the fungi and the importance of fungi in the natural world by any chance?
We do. And yes, you're absolutely correct. Mushrooms are definitely having a moment. And we are very excited by that because botanical gardens do, mushrooms are fungi, so they are not plants, but we do study them here at the botanical garden. And we have great collections of different specimens that we were able to bring out and show to visitors. And yes, mushrooms, fungi are so critical to plant life and
Mm-hmm.
to environmental health that they're a group of organisms that we're really excited about. So much so that we have organized a magic mushroom weekend that is taking place in mid-September here at the garden, uh, September 14th and 15th. And we will have all different ways to experience mushrooms, from seeing how they are used in cuisine to how they are used to make dyes and art. And um, increasingly, there are companies that are innovating in using mycelium to create packaging and
Yeah.
building materials, vegan meat alternatives. There's all kinds of things in the world. And yes, of course, mushrooms are also used. Psychoactive mushrooms are also increasingly being studied again. They've been studied for centuries, but again, there's been a lot of attention, it's certainly in the media, to psychedelics and their potential for treating all different sorts
Right.
of conditions. And while we will not be offering samples, we are eager for our visitors to learn as much as possible about the many ways in which mushrooms are used and appreciated.
So there's not a rabbit hole you can fall down and try a couple of magic mushrooms. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we
Come
have
on.
a rabbit hole,
Yes. Oh,
but
you do.
um, no, it is a constructed rabbit hole, and we would encourage you to fall down it, or to pass through it in our conservatory. But we will not be facilitating that journey with anything that you can consume.
So do you have some Easter eggs, Alice in Wonderland Easter eggs in the exhibit that one can find or that you encourage searching out?
Yeah, we have different depictions of the characters from the story, sort of seated throughout the grounds in the conservatory. When you first enter our conservatory, you're in a Victorian era glass house. Ours is really kind of the among the latest built of the Victorian era glass houses in this country, completed in 1902. And when you enter, the one of the first things you see is a pool of giant water lilies, Victoria Amazonica, which were
Oh,
named for Queen Victoria, um, and were really a prized specimen plant during the period in which the story was written. And the Oxford Botanical Garden, which would have been where the real Alice Little, and Lewis Carroll would have seen these plants frequently, was our inspiration for that first sort of entry into the wonders of the plant world and how they figure in the story. And Alice is there in a boat, among the water lilies, a sort of nod to the boat ride that is
where this story was
famously
told. Yeah.
associated with the origin of the story.
Yeah.
And then visitors pass through a doorway into one of our exhibition houses, and they are passing through our sort of homage to the Oxford Botanical Garden flower border. And then they actually do pass through what looks like a rabbit hole in sort of the roots of a tree. And then they enter our version of Wonderland, where we have all kinds of wonders of the plant world, from giant tree ferns alongside much smaller ferns to carnivorous plants. Sensitive plant is one of my favorites. It's a mimosa that if you touch the plant, it will curl up its leaves.
Oh, cool.
Um, Not everybody associates plants with having those kinds of abilities. And so in our plant wonderland throughout, you can also spot, oh, the Cheshire cat is up in that tree, or There's the Mad Hatter and the March Hare over there. So yes, we wanted to give our visitors the experience of the wonders of the plant world while also showing them, giving them an opportunity to engage with those characters throughout the exhibition, whether they're here on a day that the Mad Hatter is in residence or not.
So it sounds like there's a lot for adults to take on because there's the scientific part of it, the educational part of it, the historical part of it, and then for the kids, they're going to see this magical rabbit, and they're going to see these big card soldiers, and they're going to have, there's so much for them to do. So it sounds like has it been really successful in terms of number of people, and are you guys all very happy with how it's turned out? I don't know what the stats are, so I'm asking.
It's been wonderful. It's been so exciting to see visitors during the day and also at night, and that's another opportunity for adults actually. At night, we've been throwing Wonderland parties, so they're back. We had them in June and May before when the show first opened, and they're coming back in September, where visitors can come and dress to the nines as whatever character they like or not, and we're having basically a Wonderland dance party where you can come and we have DJs and we have some of the characters on hand. You can dance with Alice and the Queen of Hearts, and those are really going to be fabulous and fun. We love to create an experience where someone can come on a mission to see the plants of Wonderland, or they can come just to have a good time. And
Right.
so that's been incredibly successful and rewarding to see.
Because people that, love Alice, love all things Alice, is my experience. So no matter what aspect of culture it is, if it has to do with Alice, they're all in. And I first met these people at a Comic-Con, and so some were dressed up in cosplay, but if they walked by my booth and they saw Wonderland or something that reminded them, they would come right over. What's been the biggest challenge, would you say, in pulling something like this off for you?
Well, anytime you mount an exhibition in a garden, there are certain challenges. You have to, one of the big things that my team is always doing is working with artists and supporting them to showcase their work outdoors, which many artists are accustomed to, but many are also not. And I think really just being mindful of, as you said, the myriad of ways that visitors will be expecting to see Alice and trying to deliver as many of those as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really fun challenge, but it is a challenge because in those 150 plus years that have ensued since the story first appeared, there's been so many opportunities to imprint on someone's mind what Alice means and what Wonderland is about. And that's where really working as a team with outside advisors and with our guest curator, but also really working closely with everyone from food service to security to visitor services to make sure that the experience that we're offering feels as robust as possible is critical. We have special tea parties that we've developed, tea parties that have been held as part of our weekend events, but also, where you can come and you can have a tea party with your family or your friends, in our cafe that has been really popular and really special. And and as we introduce these things, we're planning really carefully. We had a friends and family launch where some of the staff attended one of the tea parties and got to sample the food and really kind of give feedback and think about what that experience was like before the visitors ever step foot on the grounds. So it's all about the planning and the cross-departmental partnerships that are really, really fun, really rewarding.
Okay, let me ask you a technical question because I'm dealing with my garden, and my garden was amazing in the spring, as most gardens are, and it's been really, really hot. And so suddenly things are wilting a lot, and then now fall comes, and you have really, you have 4 seasons there in New York. So how does the exhibit, how do the plants change, and how do you manage the change from spring, summer, and now going into the fall? Because you run through October, correct?
We do.
So
We
your
do.
leaves are going to start falling, and it's so how does one manage I mean, I imagine you bring a big team in to deal with that, but like, what are the specifics of managing that?
Sure. Well, a garden is a dynamic environment,
Yeah, that's
by
for
which
sure.
I mean, last night we had torrential rain.
Mm-hmm.
So we're constantly in touch with each other about what that means for the garden grounds. We have people here 24 hours a day to keep the garden safe and to keep the garden operating. And when there's a storm, we're in touch all day and all night. What I will say is that organizing these multi-season exhibitions, which is really what our summer exhibition is, if it
Mm-hmm.
opens in mid-May and it runs through the end of
Yeah,
October, you are
yeah.
really experiencing spring, summer, and fall. The horticulture team at the garden is incredibly talented, and the work that they do is fascinating. Really, what they're doing is developing a plant palette, we call it, the range of plants that will be on view. They're developing, in many cases, three plant palettes because what you see at the beginning in the spring for this exhibition, when you first entered the conservatory, you saw these incredibly beautiful foxgloves and delphiniums and plants that were very English garden spring
Mm-hmm.
in their appearance and in their style, and it was heartbreakingly beautiful. There were these poppies that were just gorgeous. Um, and a few days later, the poppies had wilted because that's what poppies
Puppies
do.
too. Yeah.
And then something else was put in their place. Because our staff is here every day, watering and tending to the plants. The first thing I'll say to you if you're worrying about your own garden is you should never use our garden as I made this mistake early in my gardening journey when I was working here, where I would say, why don't my peonies look good? I don't live that far from the garden and they look terrible compared to the peonies that I see at work. But that's because those folks have been trained and and
Yeah,
and know what they're doing, and I
yeah.
am an amateur. But we're changing plants
I
constantly.
bet. I
We want
bet.
everyone's Wonderland experience to be the best possible, so we're changing plants, and that looks like bringing things back into the production greenhouse when they've finished their flowering period and um, either putting them into the collections to be used in the future for display purposes when they flower again, in some cases, or in some cases, they're annuals. So we're composting them and they come back out
Mm-hmm.
around in a
Mm-hmm.
different way
Right.
as mulch, and fuel the future plants that we showcase. But yeah, it's an incredible process to see the team caring for these plants every single day. And then on Mondays when we're closed, that's when the big change outs take place. And it's pretty incredible to see what they can do.
I love your job. Uh,
I do too.
I really like your job. I like the environment that you live in. I like the people and the diversity and the excitement of so much changing, just like nature, day in and day out. I really appreciate you taking the time. I have one last question for
Absolutely.
you. If you were a character from Alice in Wonderland, who would you be and why?
Well, okay, so this was really hard. I knew that this was coming, so I thought about it
Good,
beforehand,
good. I
um, which was good because I was struggling. And as I thought about it, and I think this probably comes from that bookishness that I alluded to, and also the work that I do now, which is all about making visible sort of what this place is and how it works. It's probably going to be the Cheshire Cat.
Why?
Well, I mean, the Cheshire Cat has one of the best lines, right? Which is, we're all mad here.
Yes.
Um, but I think too, because what the Cheshire Cat is doing is sort of acting as a guide and
Mm-hmm.
helping Alice to make sense of the world around her, and not in a parental way or like what we call now a helicopter parent, not in that way, but sort of like popping in literally and offering words of wisdom, sometimes slightly confusing words of wisdom, and then disappearing and letting Alice figure it out for herself. And you know, while we don't want to pop in and then disappear on our visitors, part of the job of organizing an exhibition like this is to create just enough of an environment that is controlled by what we plan and how we lay out the space and what we tell you in the signage, but then to let you have your own experience. So that
Ah,
resonates with
oh,
me.
That's an excellent, excellent answer. That bookishness has served you very, very well. So thank you for a very compelling interview, and it was great to meet you. And I encourage everybody that's listening, if you have a chance to get to New York, I certainly am going to try and get there before this closes because, going online, it's just remarkable. And then speaking with you just brings that point home. So thank you so much, Joanna. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.